Welcome to the video. Today we will be learning about particles and slices in MStar Post. Let's set up a simple model. I'm going to add a tank. And I'm going to make it slightly smaller. Then I'm going to change the bottom as well. Now I'm going to add my first moving body. And why don't I try a pitch blade impeller? I'm going to get rid of the shaft. And then move it towards the top of the tank. Let's just make it around 0.5 meters up. And for fun, I'm going to rotate it. Let's make it 15 degrees. And I'm going to add a second moving body. And let's make it a Rushton. I'm going to remove the shaft as well and move it up a little bit. Let's make it 0.1 meters. And then rotate it 15 degrees the other direction. I'm going to rename the impeller pitch blade and the Rushton. This makes it easier to see my data in post. In output settings, I'm going to create the right interval at 0.02 and include the data I want. So in this instance, I want time average velocity as well as the EDR. And now I'm not worried about volumes or the restart files, so I'm going to change both of those right intervals to 99. Let's increase the resolution to 200 lattice points across the tank diameter. It's a value sufficient to properly predict impeller power number of the flow field across the tank. And I'm going to set the max runtime to 25 seconds. And I think I have everything set up right, so let's go ahead and run the simulation in post. You want to make sure that your GPU is selected. And now that we see it's running well, let's go ahead and start it in MStar Post. So now let's start learning about colors and slices in MStar Post. I'm going to switch the view to isometric. And I'm going to start by turning off the walls because we don't really care about that. I'm also going to refresh the simulation. I'm now going to hit play and we can watch the impellers move. If we ever get confused or disoriented, we can just turn on the tank to see what's going on. I'm only interested in looking at the X slice, so I'm going to turn off the other two. And I'm going to max out the color map below. So now that this is all set up, let's take a look at colors. We click on this button down below to open up our color options, and as you can see, there are lots and lots and lots of options for us. This might be a little confusing, but we can use this drop down to select different categories that we can pick from. Here are the divergent color schemes, where we can see the two colors kind of go in different directions. Here are the linear options. These are really nice because they can simplify the rendering. It helps you see the change in gradations and the forces. And here's the rainbow options. These are the most colorful ones. And you might say to yourself, these are the ones I want to use because they will have the most colors and give me the most information. That is true in some respects. As you can see in our model right now, we have a lot of different colors showing a lot of different types of velocities. But there's a disadvantage in that they don't show structures very well. So for example, here using a more linear pattern, and we can drop the maximum values down below, we can see a little more clearly the movement and pattern of the vortices inside of the model. So again, here's those rainbow ones. A lot of people really like to use them. They're very commonly used in renderings. And there's definitely a time and place for them. They can help us see things, but a lot of it is up to our preference, the type we like, and the type of data we use. So personally, I like to use the linear options because they simplify the model for me a little bit. Let's now take a look at the diverging options. The diverging ones are really interesting and useful because they're good at showing the structures within the model, because they have very low values as well as very high values, and then the values in between. Let's look at another way we might want to use the diverging colors. Let's say we wanted to look at the velocities moving along the y-axis. I'm going to change the velocity from magnitude to just the y-axis. And I'm going to manually adjust the scale from -0.6 to 0.6. So now with these colors, we can really see where there is fluid with negative y velocity and then positive y velocity. Let's refresh it, start it over, and press play, and watch how these fluids move. Using the slices and color gradients is just one way of looking at our data. Another really interesting type of color gradient are the structured gradients. So if I wanted to look at a critical dissipation rate, for example, and I'm going to turn on log scale just to help me see things better. Now I'm going to change the color scheme to one of the structured options. I'm going to use this traffic lights option. And I can already see how this might start looking. I'm going to turn off the logarithm option, and I can also delete the center points. For example, if I only wanted 2 colors instead of the 3. So I'm going to get rid of the red. And what I want this model to show me are values that I consider to be acceptable ranges. And I'm going to use green for that. And I also want it to show me values that I don't like or considered to be unacceptable. I'm going to use red. I'm going to turn back on my logarithmic scale. And then I can adjust the scales for these colors. Now I can really start to see the difference between energy dissipation rates I'm predicting across the fluid. For example, I could say that the green color indicates acceptable values and the red color indicates a value that is either too high or too low for my purposes. Let's go back to our color options and the structured category. And we can use this one on the top left, which has some nice colors in it. I can easily reset the minimum and maximum for the values of the colors by dragging down across the color scheme. And I'm going to change the colors to velocity. And I'm going to change it to magnitude, so it's not just the y-axis anymore. And I need to reapply the color scheme I picked earlier. So I'm going to decrease the maximum and hit play just to see all the movement coming together. Something to keep in mind when picking colors and setting thresholds is having a clear vision about what you're trying to communicate through your rendering. Are you trying to show thresholds? Are you trying to show flow rates and direction? Are you trying to show the interaction between structures and static objects? So having a picture or a goal for what you're trying to visualize will help you make these decisions about which colors to use. Now that we've looked at colors, let's look at streamlines now. I'm going to start by changing the background to black. It's just a preference thing. It helps me to see things easier. And I'm going to select this Inferno color gradient. Now what I can do is apply a filter to any component that I want. We're not going to go deep into detail on these filters, but let me just show you two for now. Let's select the glyph filter and then hit apply under the properties panel and see what happens. And now when we look at the model, we can see some arrows have appeared that represent some of the vectors of the fluids. I'm going to adjust some of these settings on this filter, and I'm not seeing them where I expect. Oh, it looks like I had the wrong object selected. So now I'm under glyph, and I can change the glyph mode to all points. And when we zoom in, we can see how every single vector now has a glyph. And I've turned off the scaling now, and I'm going to make the glyphs a little bit smaller. Looking at this now makes me think I should change the color to one that is not as dark. Let's use the rainbow. Let's zoom out, and as we can see, there's tons of little arrows, but from this distance, they don't tell us much because they all kind of blend together. Let's go ahead and reduce the number of points. So I'm going to change this from all and down to 5,000. Now I think that's not enough points, and I'm going to increase the number to 20,000. And I'm going to go ahead and reset my view just so it's straight. And I'm going to turn scaling back on. With scaling back on, I can now experiment with a couple different scale factors until I get the view that I'm looking for. Don't forget we can also combine these vectors with our slice from before. And I'm going to drop the color value down to make the background a little more transparent. So we still see all the data, but it allows us to highlight these high velocity zones. Something else you can do is split your screen. And I'm going to move this scale out of the way a little bit. And on the one on the left, I'm going to hide the glyphs. And on the one on the right, I'm going to hide the slice. Now I can see both views without them being on top of each other. In summary, this is how filters work. We can apply them to our objects and activate and deactivate them. Let's say we want to evaluate the data on a particular slice. And to do that, I'm going to create a filter with a histogram. I'm going to use velocity magnitude as the input array. Let's use 50 bins as a good number. And now we see the histogram. I can check this box to normalize the data, which is usually a good idea. And when I press play, I can even watch the data develop over time. On the x-axis, we have the velocity. I can rename the axis title velocity magnitude. And I'm going to rename the left axis probability. We can also change the appearance of the font by choosing its size or which font we even want to use. Now we have the rendering of the model with the vectors, and we have a histogram showing the velocity and probability. These will change over time when we run the simulation. And the next thing I want to show you is something called streamlines. So I'm going to go to my filter menu and pick Stream Tracer and hit apply. I'm also going to deactivate the opacity mapping. And I need to remember to enable surface streamlines. We can see the bar loading on the bottom right-hand corner. This can take a few minutes to render. Now I see the streamlines in the rendering, and I'm going to adjust how they show up a little bit. First, I'm going to reduce the resolution so there's not as many. And instead of using the line as the seed, I'm going to use a point cloud. And I'm going to make that seed cloud larger than the tank itself. And it looks like I don't have enough spawning points. And so I'm going to fiddle with this until I get the right amount to get the perspective I'm looking for. And I think I'm going to switch to time average velocity as an input instead of just the magnitude. I'm going to add a few more points. And I think I added a few too many. All right, so now we have a color scale that tells us about the velocity of the fluids, but also we have streamlines to give us an idea of the direction of the flow. Something to keep in mind with these streamers is that they do take a little bit of time to render, which means they're going to work great if you want to create pictures for a presentation or a report, but they're not going to be as effective for creating animations. Let's put all these things together and make an animation. I'm going to turn off the streams that we just made and turn on the glyphs from earlier and the slice. I'm going to enable opacity mapping and give myself a little bit more color. I'm also going to turn off the orientation trihedron for aesthetic purposes. And we can adjust the text a little bit, make it a little larger. I'm going to edit the color scale as well. Right now it's in scientific notation, and I can change it to float, which will make it a little easier to read. And to make the font a little bigger too. I'm also going to use a custom scale on the histogram so that the values don't jump as much as they move over time. Now let's save the animation. I'm going to save all views and change the frame rate to 30 frames per second. Now let's watch our video. On the left, we have the velocity magnitude transparent contour plot with some vectors layered on top of it. And we have the fluid speed distribution across this plane on the right. Something to keep in mind when creating these visualizations is the opportunity you have to try things you haven't tried before, try different colors, try different scales or filters, and really try to play around with it to get the rendering that suits your needs in your situation. Thank you for watching this video on colors and slices. Please reach out if you have any questions.